Hi, I'm Matthew Moore. I was 6 years old when my stepfather locked me in the basement and told everyone I'd been sent away to boarding school. For 12 years, I lived in the dark while he spent my dead mother's $32 million. No windows, no sunlight, just concrete walls and the sound of his footsteps above me. The world forgot I existed. My own relatives believed his lies. And when I finally escaped at 18, skeletal and broken, I discovered something that made those 12 years seem like just the beginning of his plan. The police couldn't believe what they found. The lawyers called it the most elaborate theft they'd ever seen. But what haunted me most wasn't the money or the years stolen. It was the document I found in his safe, dated the week before my mother died. Would you have survived what came next? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The air tasted different above ground. That's the first thing I remember thinking when I finally broke free. Not freedom, not relief, just the strange metallic tang of air that hadn't been recycled through a single basement vent for 12 years. It was March 2019. I was 18 years old, 6'2", and weighed barely 130 pounds. My skin was so pale it looked translucent under the streetlights of Millbrook Heights, a wealthy suburb outside of Portland, where massive houses sat behind iron gates and manicured hedges. Nobody walked these streets at night. Nobody except me, stumbling barefoot on pavement that felt like knives against feet that hadn't touched anything but cold concrete in over a decade. I'd waited for this moment for 4,380 days. I knew the exact number because I'd carved a line into the basement wall for every single one. The wall behind the old furnace where he never looked, where I kept my sanity by marking time like a prisoner of war. Because that's what I was, wasn't I? A prisoner in my own stepfather's house while the world above went on without me. Victor Ashford. That was his name. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of smile that made people trust him instantly. He wore expensive suits, drove a Mercedes S-Class, and every Sunday he attended church at St. Catherine's where he sat in the front row and donated generously. The community loved him. After my mother died, they called him a saint for taking me in, for sacrificing his bachelor lifestyle to raise another man's son. What they didn't know was that the boy they thought was away at some prestigious boarding school in Switzerland was actually 20 feet below their prayer meetings, locked behind a reinforced steel door that Victor had installed himself. My legs were shaking as I made my way down Elmhurst Drive. Every house looked the same in the dark. Giant colonials with 3-car garages and those fancy lantern-style lights flanking the front doors. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to move, had to put distance between myself and that house before Victor came home from whatever business dinner he was attending. The lock on the basement door had finally rusted through. 12 years of moisture from the ancient water heater, 12 years of me working at it with a bent nail I'd found near the utility sink. Tonight, when I pushed, it gave way with a grinding screech that sent my heart into my throat. I'd stood there for 10 full minutes, waiting for his footsteps, waiting for his voice to boom down the stairs. But the house above was silent. Empty. I'd climbed those stairs like a ghost rising from a grave. The house was exactly as I remembered and completely foreign at the same time. The kitchen had been remodeled. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, one of those fancy espresso machines that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Through the living room window, I could see my reflection, and for a moment I didn't recognize myself. Hollow cheeks, eyes too large for my face, hair grown long and matted. I looked like something from a horror movie. On the mantel sat a photograph in an ornate silver frame. Victor at some gala, shaking hands with the mayor. He was wearing a tuxedo and that practiced smile. Next to him stood a woman I didn't recognize, elegant in a blue evening gown. The plaque beneath read, Ashford Foundation Charity Ball 2018. My stomach turned. He'd built an entire life on my mother's money while I rotted below. I'd grabbed what I could. A jacket from the coat closet that hung off my skeletal frame like a tent. Shoes that were too small but better than nothing. And then I ran. Now, 3 blocks away, my lungs burned with every breath. I wasn't used to this much oxygen, this much space. The sky above was massive and terrifying. I'd forgotten how big the world was. For 12 years, my universe had been a 400-square-foot basement with a toilet, a sink, a mattress on the floor, and the books Victor occasionally threw down the stairs to keep me from going completely insane. A car turned onto the street ahead, headlights sweeping across the pavement. I ducked behind a hedge, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The car passed. Just a neighbor coming home late. But the panic didn't subside. Every sound was a threat. Every shadow was Victor coming to drag me back. I thought about my mother. Catherine Moore had been a tech entrepreneur who'd sold her software company for $32 million when I was 5. She was brilliant, driven, and she loved me fiercely. I remembered her laugh, the way she'd read to me every night. How she promised we'd travel the world together once her company sale went through. Then she met Victor at some networking event. He was charming, attentive, everything she thought she wanted after years of building her business alone. They married 6 months later. 3 months after that, she was dead. Car accident, they said. Black ice on Highway 26. Her BMW went off the road into a ravine. I was 6 years old. The funeral was a blur. I remembered Victor's hand on my shoulder, heavy and possessive. I remembered relatives I'd never met, suddenly appearing, asking questions about Mom's estate, about what would happen to me. Victor had smiled that practiced smile and assured everyone that Catherine had wanted him to take care of me, that there was a will, that everything was arranged. A week after the funeral, he took me down to the basement to help him organize some storage boxes. That's what he said, just helping with boxes. Then he locked the door and I didn't see daylight again for 12 years. The first year was the worst. I screamed until my voice gave out. I threw myself against the door until my shoulders were masses of bruises. I cried for my mother, for anyone, for God himself to save me. But the basement was soundproofed and the house sat on 2 acres of land. Nobody heard, nobody came. Victor visited twice a day. Morning and evening. He'd bring food, usually cold leftovers or cheap frozen dinners he'd microwave upstairs. He'd stand at the top of the stairs and watch me eat like I was a pet he was training. Sometimes he'd talk about his day, about the business deals he was making with my mother's money, about the investments and the properties and the lifestyle he was building. Other times he'd just stare at me with those cold blue eyes and say nothing at all. "You're going to stay down here until I say otherwise," he told me once, maybe a year in. "Nobody's looking for you, nobody cares. Your mother's family thinks you're at boarding school. The neighbors think you're thriving in Switzerland. I've shown them pictures." He smiled. "You want to know the funny part? The boy in those photos isn't even you. Just some stock image I found online. And they believe it because they want to believe it. Because it makes them feel good to think you're somewhere better." That's when I understood. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't punishment for something I'd done wrong. This was my life now. This was forever, or at least until Victor decided I was no longer useful or breathing became more expensive than it was worth. I kept moving through the dark streets of Millbrook Heights. My destination crystallized in my mind with sudden clarity. Parker Grant, my mother's brother. I'd only met him a handful of times before she died, but I remembered his face, his kind eyes, the way he'd slipped me a $20 bill once and told me to buy myself something fun. More importantly, I remembered my mother talking about him, about how he was the only person in her family she truly trusted. I didn't know if he still lived in the same house on Brookstone Avenue. I didn't know if he'd even remember me or believe what I had to say. But I had nowhere else to go and the sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Victor would be waking soon. He'd go down to the basement with breakfast and find the door open, the cage empty. And then he'd come hunting. I found the house just as the sun was breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that hurt my eyes. 12 years of fluorescent basement lighting hadn't prepared me for the intensity of a real sunrise. I stood at the end of the driveway, squinting through tears that were half pain and half something I couldn't name. The house was smaller than I remembered. A modest 2-story craftsman with blue siding and white trim. The mailbox read Grant in faded letters. At least he hadn't moved. The yard was overgrown, leaves from last fall still piled in the corners. A single light glowed in an upstairs window. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I walked to the front door on legs that barely supported my weight. My hand shook as I raised it to knock. What if he didn't believe me? What if he called Victor? What if he was in on it too? But I was out of options and out of time. I knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. Footsteps inside. Heavy, cautious. The porch light flicked on, and I winced. A chain rattled. The door opened a crack, and a man's face appeared in the gap. Older than I remembered, grayer, with deep lines around his eyes. But it was him. Parker Grant stared at me for a long moment. His expression shifted from annoyance at the early hour to confusion to something that looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Matthew?" His voice was barely a whisper. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My throat closed up. Suddenly, all the words I'd rehearsed in my head for 12 years vanished like smoke. I just stood there, shaking, this skeletal stranger on his doorstep at dawn. Parker's eyes traveled over me, taking in the too large jacket, the too small shoes, the pallor of my skin, the way I swayed on my feet like I might collapse at any moment. Something in his face cracked. He threw the door open wide. "Get inside, now." I stumbled across the threshold and my knees finally gave out. I caught myself on a small table in the entryway, sending a stack of mail scattering across the floor. Parker caught my arm, steadying me with a grip that was firm but gentle. "Easy, I've got you." He guided me to a couch in the living room. The cushions felt impossibly soft after 12 years of a thin mattress on concrete. "Stay here. Don't move." He disappeared into another room. I heard water running, cabinets opening and closing, the beep of a microwave. The living room was cluttered but clean. Books everywhere, stacked on shelves and piled on the coffee table. A guitar leaned against the wall in the corner. Photos lined the mantel, most of them faded with age. One caught my eye. My mother, young and laughing, standing next to Parker at what looked like a college graduation. Both of them grinning at the camera like the world was full of nothing but possibility. My chest tightened. Parker returned with a glass of water and a bowl of soup. He set them on the coffee table in front of me. "Drink slowly. If you haven't eaten properly in a while, we need to be careful." I wrapped my hands around the warm bowl. The heat felt foreign against my palms. I took a sip of water first. It tasted like chlorine and minerals, and it was the most incredible thing I'd ever experienced. Parker sat in the armchair across from me. He didn't speak, just watched me with those careful eyes while I drank and ate. The soup was canned chicken noodle, probably $3 at the grocery store. But to me it tasted like a feast. When I'd finished half the bowl, he finally spoke. "Matthew, everyone thinks you're in Switzerland. Victor said you'd been enrolled at some international academy. He shows people pictures, sends updates." He paused. "Where have you been?" I set the bowl down. My hands were shaking again. "In his basement. For 12 years. Since I was 6. The silence that followed was absolute. Parker's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "What?" "He locked me in the basement the week after Mom's funeral." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, rough from years of barely speaking. "He'd bring food twice a day. Sometimes books. That was it. No windows, no phone, no contact with anyone. Just concrete and darkness and the sound of him living my mother's life upstairs." Parker stood abruptly and walked to the window. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he turned back to me, there was something dangerous in his eyes. "He kept you prisoner. For 12 years, while spending Kate's money." I nodded. Why didn't anyone check? Why didn't the school, the neighbors, someone realize? His voice was rising now, anger bleeding through the shock. He was smart about it. The boarding school he told everyone about, it actually exists. I looked it up once on an old laptop he threw away that I managed to fix. Thornfield Academy in Geneva. Prestigious, exclusive, nearly impossible to contact directly. Parents communicate through a portal system. He must have created fake accounts, fake progress reports, everything. And the tuition matches what he was withdrawing from the trust fund. On paper, it all looked legitimate. Parker's jaw clenched. The trust fund. Kate's estate was supposed to be managed by her attorney until you turned 25. Victor was only supposed to be the guardian, with supervised access for your expenses. Ronald Hastings. I remember that name from when I was little. I leaned back against the couch, exhaustion crashing over me in waves. I don't know what happened to him. Maybe Victor paid him off. Maybe he's in on it. All I know is that nobody came looking for me. I came looking. Parker's voice was quiet now. The first year after Kate died, I tried to visit. Called, sent letters. Victor always had an excuse. You were adjusting to the new school, the time difference made calls difficult, you'd write when you were ready. Eventually, he stopped returning my messages altogether. I thought you just didn't want contact with her family anymore. The guilt in his voice was palpable. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that Victor was a master manipulator, but I was too tired. The adrenaline that had carried me through the night was gone. I was running on fumes. We need to call the police, Parker said suddenly. Right now. We need to document everything, get you medical attention, and get that monster arrested before he realizes you're gone. As if on cue, my phone. No, Victor's phone that I'd stolen from the kitchen counter on my way out, buzzed in the jacket pocket. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. 3 missed calls. All from home. Then a text message appeared. I know you're not in the basement. This is a mistake, Matthew. Come back now and we'll forget this happened. Run, and I promise you'll regret it. I showed Parker the screen. His face hardened. He knows. He's probably been awake for an hour. He always checks on me first thing. My voice was flat, stating facts. He'll have noticed the rusted lock, seen that I took some clothes and shoes. He's smart. He'll figure out where I'd go. Parker was already moving, grabbing his own phone from the kitchen counter. Then we don't have time to waste. I'm calling 911. I listened as he reported it. His voice was controlled, but I could hear the tremor underneath. I need to report a kidnapping. A young man who's been held captive for 12 years. He just escaped. Yes, he's here with me now. Yes, he needs medical attention. The perpetrator is Victor Ashford, lives at 847 Elmhurst Drive in Millbrook Heights. There was a pause as the dispatcher asked questions. Parker gave them his address. Please hurry. The man who did this knows the victim escaped. We think he might come here. He hung up and looked at me. They're sending officers and an ambulance. 10 minutes, maybe less. I nodded, pulling the jacket tighter around myself even though the house was warm. My body couldn't seem to stop shaking. Matthew. Parker sat down next to me on the couch. I need you to know something. Your mother, she made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I'd look after you. I failed that promise. I let that man convince me you were fine, that you'd moved on. I'll never forgive myself for that. You didn't know, I whispered. I should have tried harder. His eyes were wet. But I'm here now. And I swear to you, we're going to make this right, all of it. In the distance, I heard sirens. The ambulance arrived first. 2 paramedics, a woman with kind eyes and a young man who couldn't hide his shock when he saw me. They worked efficiently, checking my vitals, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around my skeletal arm, shining lights in my eyes. Severe malnutrition, the woman said quietly to her partner. Possible vitamin deficiencies, muscle atrophy. She turned to me with a gentle smile. We're going to take you to Westside Medical Center. It's about 15 minutes from here. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign. 2 police cruisers pulled up as they were loading me into the ambulance. Parker was talking to the officers, gesturing toward Victor's house, his voice urgent. I caught fragments. 12 years. Basement. 32 million. Catherine Moore. One of the officers, a woman in her 40s with sergeant stripes on her sleeve, approached the ambulance. Matthew? I'm Sergeant Brennan. We're going to need a full statement from you. But that can wait until you've been checked out at the hospital. Right now, we're sending units to Victor Ashford's residence. Is there anything we should know before we go in? Any weapons? Any other victims? I shook my head. Just me. He has a gun safe in his office upstairs. Code is 1827. My mother's birthday. Her expression darkened. Thank you. We'll be careful. She looked at Parker. Are you family? Uncle, her brother. Parker's voice was firm. I'm going with him to the hospital. Good. Stay close to him. We'll send someone to take his statement once. He's been cleared by the doctors. The ride to the hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and concerned faces. They started an IV, draped heated blankets over me, monitored every breath and heartbeat. Parker sat in the jump seat, his hand on my shoulder, a steady presence in the chaos. Westside Medical Center was massive and sterile and overwhelming. They wheeled me past the emergency room intake into a private examination area. A doctor appeared, mid-50s, with graying temples and steady hands. Dr. Callahan, according to his badge. He examined me thoroughly, asking questions in a calm, measured voice. When was the last time I'd seen sunlight? What had my diet consisted of? Had I experienced any major illnesses or injuries during my captivity? Each answer seemed to deepen the concern in his eyes. "We're going to admit you," he said finally. "You're severely malnourished, dehydrated, and your vitamin D levels are almost undetectable. We need to monitor your refeeding carefully. Your body isn't used to normal nutrition anymore. If we're not careful, the shock of proper food could actually cause more damage." The words washed over me. I was too tired to process them fully. They moved me to a room on the 4th floor. Private, quiet, with a window that looked out over the parking lot. Actual sunlight streamed through the blinds. I stared at it like it was a miracle. Parker stayed. He sat in the vinyl chair next to my bed while nurses came and went, adjusting IV drips, taking blood samples, checking monitors. Finally, when we were alone, he spoke. "Tell me about the money. You said Victor was spending Kate's estate." I took a breath, organizing thoughts that had circled my mind for 12 years. Mom's software company sold for $32 million. She'd set up a trust fund before she died, meant for my education and future. Victor was supposed to be the trustee along with her lawyer, Ronald Hastings. But after she died, I think Victor must have paid Hastings off. Or threatened him, or something, because he disappeared. Victor took sole control. "Kate would never have set it up that way," Parker said firmly. "She was too smart for that. She knew Victor hadn't been in her life long enough to trust with that kind of money." "I know. I think he changed the documents. Forged signatures, maybe. Or coerced her before she died. I don't know the details. All I know is what he told me down there. He'd brag about it sometimes, especially when he was drunk. The house renovations, the cars, the investments. He turned her millions into his fortune while keeping me locked away so I couldn't question anything or claim what was mine." Parker stood and walked to the window. Outside, the morning had turned bright and clear. Normal people going about normal days. We'll need financial records. Bank statements, trust documents, everything. If he forged anything, we'll find it. There's more. I hesitated, unsure how to voice the suspicion that had grown in my mind over the years. "I don't think my mother's accident was an accident." Parker turned sharply. "What?" "The timing was too convenient. They'd just gotten married. The company had just sold. She'd just updated her will, probably at his insistence. Then 3 months later, she's dead, and he has everything. Me, the money, the house. All of it. The police investigated. It was ruled an accident. What if he paid them off too? Or what if he's just that good at covering his tracks?" I met Parker's eyes. "Uncle Parker, I've had 12 years to think about this. 12 years of him bragging about how smart he is, how he planned everything perfectly. He slipped once, about a year ago. He was drunk, angrier than usual. He said something like, 'Your mother thought she was so clever, but all it took was a little brake fluid and some patience.'" The color drained from Parker's face. He admitted to murdering her? Not directly, but the implication was clear, at least to me. Parker sat down, heavily. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "We tell the police. Everything, every detail you can remember. If Victor killed Kate and stole her money and kept you prisoner for 12 years, he's not going to see freedom again. Ever." A knock at the door interrupted us. Sergeant Brennan entered, accompanied by a younger officer with a laptop. "Matthew, I know you're exhausted, but we need to get your statement while everything is fresh. Are you up for that?" I nodded. She pulled a chair close to the bed. "Take your time. Start from the beginning." So I did. I told them everything. The funeral, the basement, the twice-daily food deliveries, the isolation, the books he'd throw down occasionally, to keep me from losing my mind completely. The way he'd brag about his investments and his properties and his perfect life built on my mother's money. The comment about brake fluid. The forged documents. The fake boarding school. The officer with the laptop typed furiously, stopping me occasionally to clarify details. Sergeant Brennan's expression grew darker with every sentence. When I finished, My throat was raw, and my energy completely depleted. Brennan stood. We've secured the house on Elmhurst Drive. Victor Ashford wasn't there when we arrived, but we've issued a warrant for his arrest. We found the basement. The door, the makeshift living space, the marks on the walls. Her voice softened. Matthew, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've never seen anything like what you survived. Did you find any documents? Financial records? We found a safe in his office. We're bringing in a specialist to open it. If there's evidence inside, we'll have it. She paused. There's something else. We contacted Thornfield Academy in Geneva. They have no record of you ever being enrolled. But they do have record of substantial tuition payments from a Victor Ashford for a student named Matthew Moore. The payments were made, but you were never actually attending. He was funneling money into a fake enrollment. Parker made a sound of disgust. So he was embezzling from the trust fund under the guise of education expenses. That's what it looks like. We've also reached out to Ronald Hastings, Kate's attorney. He hasn't practiced law in Oregon since 2008. Moved to Costa Rica suddenly and never returned. We're working on tracking him down, but my guess is Victor paid him off to disappear. I leaned back against the pillows, the weight of it all pressing down. He thought of everything. Not everything, Brennan said. He didn't think you'd escape. That was his mistake. After the police left, Parker moved his chair closer. You need to rest. But before you do, I want you to know something. Your mother loved you more than anything in the world. Everything she built, every dollar she earned, it was all for you. For your future. Victor stole that, but we're going to get it back. All of it. I don't care about the money, I said quietly. I just want him to pay for what he did. He will. I promise you, he will. A nurse came in to adjust my IV and check my vitals. She smiled warmly. Try to get some sleep, honey. You're safe here. We've got security posted outside your door just in case. Just in case Victor showed up. The thought should have terrified me, but I was too exhausted for fear. My eyes drifted closed. For the first time in 12 years, I fell asleep knowing that when I woke up, I wouldn't be in that basement. I wouldn't hear his footsteps above me. I wouldn't be alone in the dark. I was free, and now, it was time to make him answer for everything. I woke to the sound of rain against the hospital window. For a moment, panic seized me. Rain meant moisture. Moisture meant the basement would smell worse, that mold smell that never quite left my lungs. Then I remembered. I wasn't there anymore. Parker was asleep in the chair beside my bed, his head tilted at an awkward angle that would leave his neck sore. A breakfast tray sat untouched on the rolling table. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. The sight of it made my stomach clench with a hunger I'd learned to ignore years ago. I pressed the button to sit up slowly. Every muscle in my body ached. The doctor had warned me that 12 years of limited movement would take time to recover from. Physical therapy, he'd said. Months of it, maybe years before I'd feel normal again. Normal? I didn't even know what that meant anymore. A nurse entered, checking her tablet. Good morning, Matthew. How are you feeling? Tired. Sore. That's to be expected. Dr. Callahan will be by in about an hour to discuss your treatment plan. In the meantime, there are some people here to see you. A detective and someone from the district attorney's office. Are you up for visitors? I glanced at Parker, who had stirred awake at the sound of voices. He nodded at me. Only if you're ready. Send them in. The detective who entered was not Sergeant Brennan. This man was older, maybe late 50s, with steel-gray hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. He wore a rumpled suit and carried a thick folder under his arm. Matthew Moore? I'm Detective Raymond Walsh. This is Assistant District Attorney Lily Daniels. He gestured to the woman beside him, younger, sharper, with intelligent eyes that studied me carefully. Lily stepped forward first. Mr. Moore, I want you to know that we're treating this case with the highest priority. What was done to you constitutes multiple felonies: kidnapping, false imprisonment, embezzlement, identity fraud, and possibly much more. We're building a case that will ensure Victor Ashford spends the rest of his life in prison. Have you found him? I asked. Detective Walsh shook his head. Not yet. But we've frozen all his accounts, issued alerts at airports and border crossings, and we're monitoring his known associates. He can't access money, can't leave the country, can't hide for long. He opened the folder and spread several documents across the foot of my bed. We cracked the safe in his office. What we found is extraordinary. Victor kept records of everything, almost like he was proud of it. The first document was a bank statement. My mother's trust account. I scanned the numbers, my breath catching. The original deposit, $32 million. The current balance, $473,000. He spent almost everything, I whispered. Not spent. Transferred. Lily pointed to a series of highlighted transactions. He systematically moved money from the trust into shell corporations, offshore accounts, real estate holdings. He was laundering your inheritance and building himself an empire. Parker leaned over to look. Shell corporations? Which ones? Detective Walsh flipped to another page. Ashford Holdings LLC, registered in Delaware. Pinnacle Investments, registered in the Cayman Islands. Westridge Properties, Nevada. We've identified at least 7 separate entities, all controlled by Victor, all funded with money from your mother's estate. Can we get it back? Parker's voice was tight with anger. We're working on it, Lily said. The assets are frozen pending the outcome of the criminal case. Once Victor is convicted, we'll petition for full restitution. It won't be quick, but Matthew is the rightful heir. He'll get back what's his. I looked at the next document. It was a forged letter, supposedly from Ronald Hastings, stating that the trust arrangement had been modified per Catherine Moore's final wishes, granting Victor sole control. The signature looked authentic, but the date was wrong. It was dated 3 days after my mother's funeral. Hastings never wrote this, I said. We know, Detective Walsh replied. We tracked down Hastings in Costa Rica. Took some doing, but we found him. He's agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. What did he say? The detective's expression darkened. Victor approached him a week after your mother died. Offered him $2 million to sign over control of the trust and disappear. Hastings was going through a messy divorce, drowning in legal fees. He took the money and ran. He says he thought Victor would just mismanage the funds, maybe spend too much. He never imagined anything like this. $2 million to betray a client. Parker's voice dripped with contempt. Lily nodded grimly. He'll face consequences, but right now his testimony is crucial. He can confirm that the trust documents were fraudulent, that Victor orchestrated the whole thing. Detective Walsh pulled out another document. This one made my blood run cold. It was a photocopy of an insurance policy. My mother's life insurance. $5 million, with Victor Ashford listed as the sole beneficiary. She changed this policy 2 months before she died. Walsh said quietly. Previously, the beneficiary was you, with the funds to be held in trust until you turned 18. According to the insurance company's records, Catherine came in personally to make the change. She wouldn't do that, I said immediately. She wouldn't cut me out. The signature is hers. We had a handwriting analyst verify it. But here's what's interesting. He laid out another page. This is the visitor log from the insurance office that day. Catherine Moore signed in at 2:15 p.m. Victor Ashford signed in at 2:14 p.m. They went in together. Parker caught on immediately. He coerced her, threatened her, maybe. Made her change it while he watched. That's our theory, Lily said. Unfortunately, it's hard to prove coercion after the fact, especially with the victim deceased. But it establishes a pattern. Victor was positioning himself to inherit everything. What about her death? I asked, my heart pounding. Have you looked into the accident? Detective Walsh's eyes sharpened. What about it? I repeated what I'd told Parker and the police earlier. The comment Victor had made about brake fluid. The suspicious timing. Walsh listened intently, making notes. The case was closed as an accidental death. Single vehicle collision, icy roads, no witnesses. But if you're saying Victor essentially confessed to tampering with the vehicle, that changes things. We'll need to reopen the investigation, have the crash report reviewed, see if we can exhume evidence. He paused. The car was totaled. It was sent to a salvage yard and crushed years ago. Physical evidence will be nearly impossible to recover. But you believe me? I believe that a man who would keep a young man locked in a basement for 12 years is capable of murder. Whether we can prove it is another matter. Lily pulled out a final document. There's one more thing. We found this in the safe. It's dated 2 weeks before your mother's death. I took it with shaking hands. It was a letter, written in my mother's handwriting, addressed to Parker. Parker, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I need you to know that I'm afraid. Victor has become controlling, aggressive. He wants access to my money, to the trust I set up for Matthew. I've refused, but he's pressuring me constantly. Last week, he grabbed my arm so hard he left bruises. I'm documenting everything, keeping records. If anything happens to me, please protect Matthew. Don't let Victor anywhere near him or my estate. I've made mistakes, but my son deserves better. Protect him, please, Kate. The room was silent except for the rain. Parker's face had gone ashen. His hands trembled as he reached for the letter. She knew, he whispered. She knew he was dangerous, and she tried to warn me. Why didn't she leave him? I asked, my voice breaking. Fear, probably, Lily said softly. Or maybe she thought she could handle it. Many victims of domestic violence believe they can manage the situation until it's too late. Parker looked at Detective Walsh. Why was this letter in Victor's safe? Kate wrote it to me. How did he get it? That's what we're wondering. Either he intercepted it before she could mail it, or he found it among her things after she died. Either way, he kept it. Maybe as a trophy. Maybe as leverage in case anyone ever questioned him. I stared at my mother's handwriting. The careful loops, the slight slant to the right. I'd forgotten what her writing looked like. She tried to protect me. She did, Parker said, his voice thick with emotion. And she'd be so proud of you for surviving, for escaping, for fighting back. Detective Walsh gathered the documents. We have enough evidence to charge Victor with kidnapping, false imprisonment, embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft. The murder charge will be harder, but we're pursuing it. When we catch him, and we will, he's going away forever. What do I do now? I asked. You heal, Lily said firmly. You let us handle the legal battle. You focus on getting stronger, physically and mentally. We'll need you to testify eventually, but that's months away. For now, just take care of yourself. After they left, Parker sat beside me on the bed. He held the letter from my mother, reading it over and over as if the words might change. I should have known, he said finally. I should have pushed harder to see you. I should have trusted my instincts that something was wrong. He fooled everyone, I replied. That's what he does. He's a predator. He found Mom when she was vulnerable after building her company alone. He love-bombed her, rushed the marriage, isolated her from family. It's textbook. How do you know all that? Books. He threw down psychology textbooks once, probably by accident. I read everything I could about manipulation, about narcissists, about people like him. I needed to understand what happened so I wouldn't go crazy thinking it was somehow my fault. Parker looked at me with something like awe. You survived hell, and came out of it smarter and stronger. Kate would be so incredibly proud. I didn't feel smart or strong. I felt exhausted and broken and angry. But I nodded anyway because I needed him to believe it, even if I didn't yet. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Somewhere in the city, Victor Ashford was running, hiding, planning his next move. But for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't afraid of him. I was ready to face whatever came next. 3 days passed in the hospital. Physical therapists helped me walk short distances down the hallway. Nutritionists carefully planned meals to rebuild my strength without shocking my system. Counselors stopped by daily, gentle probing questions about my mental state that I deflected with practiced ease. I wasn't ready to talk about the psychological damage. Not yet. Parker stayed with me almost constantly. He'd gone home only once to shower and grab clothes. The rest of the time he camped in my hospital room, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair, bringing me books and magazines, filling the silence with stories about my mother that I'd never heard. On the 4th morning, everything changed. I was in the bathroom, struggling through the simple act of showering, when I heard raised voices from my room. I wrapped a towel around myself and opened the door to find Parker arguing with a man in an expensive suit. Mid-40s, perfectly styled hair, a leather briefcase in hand. You can't be in here, Parker was saying. Get out before I call security. The man held up his hands in a placating gesture. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need 5 minutes with Matthew. Who are you? I asked, gripping the doorframe for support. He turned to me with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Graham Westbrook. I'm an attorney representing Victor Ashford. I'd like to discuss a resolution to this unfortunate situation." Parker moved between us. "Matthew doesn't need to hear anything from Victor's lawyer. He has his own legal representation through the DA's office." "I understand that. But what I'm proposing could benefit everyone involved." Graham reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document. "Victor is willing to return a significant portion of the estate funds in exchange for Matthew agreeing not to pursue criminal charges." I stared at him in disbelief. "He kept me locked in a basement for 12 years and he thinks he can buy his way out of it." "I know how it sounds," Graham said smoothly. "But consider the alternative. A trial could take years. It will be invasive, traumatic, and there's no guarantee of conviction. Victor has resources, connections. He can afford the best defense team in the country. Meanwhile, you'll be dragged through endless depositions and cross-examinations, reliving your trauma over and over." "Get out," I said quietly. Matthew, please just look at the offer. $10 million, transferred immediately into an account of your choosing. You'd be financially secure for life. You could move on, start fresh, put this behind you. He murdered my mother." My voice rose. "He stole 12 years of my life. You think $10 million makes that okay?" Graham's expression hardened slightly. "I'm trying to help you avoid a painful process. But if you insist on pursuing this, be aware that Victor will fight. He'll claim you're mentally unstable from isolation, that your memories are unreliable, that you're exaggerating for financial gain. He'll drag your mother's reputation through the mud, suggest she was an unfit parent who neglected you. He'll make you wish you'd taken the money." Parker stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Are you threatening him?" "I'm explaining reality. This is what trials do. They destroy everyone involved." He placed the document on the bed. "The offer stands for 48 hours. After that, it's off the table, and you'll face the full force of Victor's legal resources." He left before either of us could respond. I stood there, dripping water onto the hospital floor, my hands shaking with rage. "Don't even consider it," Parker said immediately. "It's a manipulation tactic. He's trying to scare you into backing down." "I know." I moved back into the bathroom to finish dressing. "But he's right about one thing. A trial will be hell. So we make sure it doesn't go to trial. We make sure the evidence is so overwhelming that Victor has no choice but to plead guilty." When Detective Walsh arrived an hour later, we told him about Graham Westbrook's visit. His expression darkened. "That's witness intimidation. I'll have a word with Mr. Westbrook about appropriate contact with victims." He pulled out his phone and made a call. After a tense conversation, he hung up. He claims he was simply presenting a settlement offer, which technically isn't illegal. But I've made it clear that any further unsolicited contact will result in charges. "Does this mean Victor is feeling desperate?" I asked. "Possibly. Or it means he's testing you, seeing if you'll break." Walsh sat down. "I actually came by with an update. We've traced Victor's movements. He withdrew $50,000 in cash from a bank in Seattle 2 days ago. We have him on security footage." "Seattle? That's 5 hours from here. He's running, but he's staying relatively close. My guess is he's trying to gather more resources before attempting to leave the country. We've got the Border Patrol on alert. But Canada is a long border, and he knows the area well. What if he comes back here?" Parker asked. "What if he tries to hurt Matthew? We have security posted outside this room 24/7. He'd be insane to try anything in a hospital. But as a precaution, once Matthew is discharged, we're recommending a safe location until Victor is in custody." The thought of more hiding, more locked rooms, made my stomach turn. "I'm not going back into a cage. I don't care how safe it is." "It wouldn't be like that," Walsh assured me. "Just a secure apartment with police presence nearby, temporary, until we resolve this." I didn't respond. The idea of running, of hiding from Victor again, felt like letting him win. That evening, after Walsh left and Parker had gone to grab dinner from the cafeteria, my phone buzzed. The hospital had given me a replacement phone since I'd fled with nothing. Only a handful of people had the number. The text was from an unknown contact. "You made a mistake refusing my offer. Some opportunities don't come twice." My blood ran cold. Another message followed. Immediately. Ask your uncle about the brake lines on his truck. Would be a shame if something happened to him too. I was out of bed before I consciously decided to move. I grabbed my ivy pole and stumbled to the hallway. Security! I need security now. 2 officers rushed over. I showed them the messages, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. One of them immediately called it in while the other stayed with me. Parker returned 5 minutes later to find the hallway swarming with police. What happened? Victor. He sent messages. He threatened you. I grabbed his arm. Your truck. He said something about brake lines. Parker's face went pale. Detective Walsh arrived within 20 minutes, 2 more officers in tow. They went straight to the parking garage to examine Parker's truck. I waited in my room, unable to sit still, pacing despite the pain in my weakened legs. Walsh returned with a grim expression. The brake lines were cut. Recent, within the last few hours. If Parker had driven that truck, he wouldn't have made it out of the parking garage. The room spun. I grabbed the bed rail for support. He's here. He's been here. We're reviewing all security footage. The parking garage, the hospital entrances, everything. We'll find him. Walsh looked at Parker. You're both in danger. We need to move you tonight. Both of you. Non-negotiable. I wanted to argue, to insist I wouldn't be driven into hiding again, but the fear in Parker's eyes stopped me. This wasn't just about me anymore. Victor was willing to hurt, possibly kill, anyone who got in his way. Where will we go? Parker asked quietly. We have a secure facility in Thorndale, about 40 miles from here. It's a safe house we use for high-risk witnesses. Guarded, monitored, completely off the grid. You'll stay there until Victor is apprehended. 2 hours later, we were in an unmarked van, escorted by police vehicles front and back. I watched the hospital disappear behind us, replaced by dark highways and scattered streetlights. Parker sat beside me, silent, processing how close he'd come to death. The safe house turned out to be a modest ranch-style home in a suburban neighborhood. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary. Inside, it was fortified. Reinforced doors, security cameras covering every angle, panic buttons in every room. 2 officers would be stationed inside with us at all times. 2 more outside in a surveillance van. We were prisoners again, just in a nicer cage. That night, lying in a strange bed in a strange room, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I'd ever truly be free. Victor had taken 12 years of my life in that basement. Now he was taking my freedom again, forcing me into hiding, turning me into a perpetual victim. But something hardened in my chest as I lay there, a determination that surprised me with its intensity. I'd survived 12 years in the dark. I'd escaped. I'd found allies and evidence and courage I didn't know I possessed. Victor wanted me scared. He wanted me to run, to hide, to eventually give up and take his blood money and disappear. Instead, I was going to destroy him. The safe house in Thorndale felt like a liminal space. Not quite freedom, not quite captivity. I spent the first 2 days adjusting to the strange rhythm of supervised safety. Officers rotated shifts every 12 hours. Parker cooked meals in the small kitchen, simple things like pasta and sandwiches. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said. On the 3rd morning, Detective Walsh arrived with someone I didn't recognize. A woman, maybe 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime not being intimidated. Matthew, Parker, this is Dr. Vanessa Chen. She's a forensic accountant who's been reviewing Victor's financial records for us. Walsh gestured to the dining table where we all sat down. Doctor. Chen opened her laptop and turned it so we could see the screen. I've spent the last 72 hours tracing every transaction that came out of your mother's trust fund. What I've found is remarkable, and not in a good way. Victor Ashford didn't just steal your inheritance. He built an entire criminal enterprise with it. She pulled up a spreadsheet with hundreds of entries. The shell corporations we initially identified were just the surface level. Underneath those, there are layers. Victor used your mother's money to fund real estate fraud schemes, Ponzi investments, and what appears to be money laundering for several other wealthy individuals trying to hide assets. Parker leaned forward. You're saying he branched out beyond just stealing from Matthew? Exactly. Once he had access to $32 million, he positioned himself as a financial consultant for Portland's elite. He promised incredible returns, used Catherine's legitimate business success as his credential. People trusted him because they thought he'd successfully managed a tech entrepreneur's estate. My stomach turned. How many people did he steal from? At least 47 individuals, or families that we've identified so far. Total losses exceeding $90 million. Dr. Chen clicked to another spreadsheet. But here's where it gets interesting. Victor kept meticulous records. Every transaction, every fraudulent deal, every lie he told. It's all documented in encrypted files we recovered from his personal server. Why would he keep evidence of his own crimes? I asked. Insurance, Detective Walsh said. Some of the people he defrauded are powerful. Politicians, business executives, people with connections. If any of them turned on him, he'd have leverage. Proof of their involvement in tax evasion and illegal financial schemes. Dr. Chen nodded. It's a common tactic among white-collar criminals. Create mutually assured destruction. Everyone's farmlice. Guilty, so nobody talks. But he didn't count on Matthew escaping, Parker said slowly. Once Matthew came forward, the whole house of cards started to fall. Precisely. Dr. Chen pulled up another file. And this is where it gets even more interesting. Among Victor's records, I found communication with a private investigator named Dale Fontaine. Victor hired him 6 months ago to track down any remaining family members of Catherine Moore who might question the trust arrangement. The blood drained from my face. He was looking for Uncle Parker and others. Your mother had cousins in California, an aunt in Florida. Victor was systematically identifying anyone who might become a problem. She clicked to an email thread. But Dale Fontaine wasn't just investigating. He was also the one who helped Victor create the fake boarding school documentation, the fabricated progress reports, the forged signatures on enrollment papers. He even created a fake student ID with your photo. Parker's hands clenched into fists. Where is this Dale Fontaine now? That's the good news, Walsh said. We picked him up yesterday morning. He's currently sitting in an interrogation room, and he's very interested in making a deal. He knows Victor tried to have you killed with those brake lines. He wants immunity in exchange for testimony. I sat back, processing this. What can he tell us? Dr. Chen closed her laptop and looked directly at me. Everything. Dale Fontaine was Victor's fixer for over a decade. He didn't just help with your situation. He was involved in your mother's death. The room went silent. Even the officers stationed by the door seemed to lean in closer. What do you mean involved? My voice came out barely above a whisper. Detective Walsh pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed he was carrying. Fontaine admitted under questioning that Victor hired him to tamper with your mother's vehicle. He cut the brake lines on her BMW the night before the accident. Victor paid him $50,000 and promised more work in the future. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected. I'd known in my gut. But having it confirmed, hearing that someone had murdered my mother for money, made everything real in a way it hadn't been before. Parker's voice was tight with rage. He confessed to murder? Accessory to murder. He claims he didn't know Victor intended to kill Catherine, that he thought it was just meant to scare her or cause a minor accident. But the law doesn't distinguish. He participated in an act that directly led to her death. He's looking at 25 to life unless he cooperates fully. And he's willing to testify against Victor? I asked. He'll testify to everything. The brake line tampering, the fake boarding school documentation, the shell corporations, the money laundering. He kept his own records too, including recordings of phone conversations with Victor. He's a career criminal who understands leverage. Dr. Chen reopened her laptop. There's one more thing. In Victor's encrypted files, I found a document dated 5 days before Catherine's death. It's a draft will, unsigned, that would have left everything to you in a trust managed by Parker, with Victor getting a modest stipend as your guardian. Catherine never signed it, but its existence suggests she was planning to cut Victor out. He found out, I said, the pieces falling into place. He found the draft will and realized she was about to leave him with nothing. So he killed her before she could make it official. That's our theory. We can't prove he saw the document, but the timing is suspicious. Catherine dies, Victor produces a different will that leaves him in control, and Ronald Hastings conveniently validates it before disappearing to Costa Rica with $2 million. Parker stood abruptly and walked to the window. His shoulders were shaking. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Kate knew. She knew he was dangerous, and she was trying to protect Matthew. She just didn't move fast enough. I joined him at the window. Outside, the suburban street looked peaceful. Kids riding bikes, a mailman making his rounds, someone mowing their lawn. Normal life continuing while we sat in this safe house discussing murder and conspiracy. "We have him," I said quietly. "With Fontaine's testimony and Dr. Chen's financial evidence, we have him." "We do," Detective Walsh confirmed. "The DA is preparing an arrest warrant for first-degree murder, in addition to all the other charges. When we find Victor, he's never seeing daylight again." "When, not if?" Parker asked, turning from the window. Walsh hesitated. "We have a lead. One of Victor's shell corporations owns a cabin in the Cascade Mountains, about 2 hours from here. It's remote, off-grid, the kind of place someone could hide for a while. We're organizing a tactical team to move on it tonight." "I want to be there," I said immediately. "Absolutely not. This is a police operation, potentially dangerous. You need to stay here where you're safe." "He took 12 years of my life. He murdered my mother. I deserve to see him caught." Walsh shook his head firmly. "I understand how you feel, but I can't risk a civilian in an active arrest situation. Victor is desperate and dangerous. If shooting starts, I need to know my team can focus on the threat, not on protecting you." I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. Still, the thought of sitting in this safe house while they brought Victor in felt unbearable. I'd spent 12 years powerless. I needed to see this through. Dr. Chen stood, gathering her things. "For what it's worth, Matthew, what you survived is extraordinary. The evidence you provided, your testimony, your willingness to come forward, that's what made this entire investigation possible. You might not be there for the arrest, but make no mistake. You're the reason Victor Ashford will spend the rest of his life in prison." After they left, Parker and I sat in silence. One of the officers made coffee and brought us each a cup. The afternoon stretched into evening. We tried to watch television but couldn't focus. Tried to eat but had no appetite. Everything hung in suspension, waiting for word from the mountains. At 9:47 p.m., Detective Walsh called. Parker put it on speaker so I could hear. "We've secured the cabin. Victor Ashford is in custody. No shots fired. He surrendered without resistance." I closed my eyes, a wave of emotion crashing over me so intense I couldn't speak. Parker gripped my shoulder. "Is he hurt?" Parker asked. "No, he's perfectly fine and already demanding his lawyer." Walsh paused. "Matthew, it's over. He can't hurt you anymore." But as I hung up the phone, I knew it wasn't really over. The arrest was just the beginning. Now came the hardest part. Facing him in court and making sure justice was finally served. The courthouse in downtown Portland was an imposing structure of gray stone and tall windows that seemed designed to make you feel small. I stood on the steps 3 months after Victor's arrest, wearing a suit Parker had bought me for the occasion. It hung better now. Physical therapy and regular meals had put 20 pounds back on my frame, though I was still far from healthy. News vans lined the street. Reporters clustered near the entrance, cameras ready. The story had exploded once the details became public. Tech hair held captive for 12 years. While Stepfather stole fortune had dominated headlines for weeks. My face was everywhere. I'd become a symbol, a cautionary tale, a source of morbid fascination. Parker stood beside me, his hand on my elbow for support. "You ready for this?" I nodded, though my hands were shaking. "Let's go." The reporters surged forward as we climbed the steps. Microphones thrust toward my face. Questions shouted over each other. "Matthew, how does it feel to face your abuser in court? Will you be seeking the death penalty? Is it true Victor stole over $30 million? Do you blame yourself for not escaping sooner?" That last question stopped me cold. I turned toward the reporter who'd asked it. A young woman with overly styled hair and predatory eyes. I was 6 years old when he locked me in that basement. I didn't escape sooner because I was a victim of a violent criminal. Don't ever suggest that any of this was my fault. Parker gently pulled me forward before I could say more. We pushed through the crowd and into the cool, quiet interior of the courthouse. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, rows of benches, the judge's elevated platform. It smelled like old paper and floor polish. Assistant District Attorney Lily Daniels met us in the hallway outside. "Victor will be brought in shortly. I want to prepare you for what you're going to see. He's lost weight, looks older, not the intimidating figure you remember. Don't let that fool you into sympathy. He's still the same man who committed these crimes." "I won't," I said. "Good. Today is the preliminary hearing. We'll present our evidence, and the judge will determine if there's sufficient cause to proceed to trial. Given the mountain of documentation we have, this should be straightforward. But Victor's defense team will try to poke holes, suggest alternative explanations, anything to create reasonable doubt. What do I need to do?" "Just be honest. Answer the questions clearly. Don't let them rattle you." She paused. "You're stronger than you think, Matthew. You've already survived the worst. This is just paperwork compared to what you've been through." We entered the courtroom and took our seats behind the prosecution table. The gallery filled with observers, journalists, legal students, curious citizens who'd followed the case. I recognized some faces. Dr. Chen, who'd traced Victor's financial crimes. Detective Walsh, who'd led the investigation. Dale Fontaine, the private investigator turned witness, sat in a separate section under guard. Then the bailiff announced, "All rise, the Honorable Judge Patricia Reeves presiding." Judge Reeves was a woman in her late 50s, with a no-nonsense expression and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She took her seat and gestured for everyone else to sit. "We're here for the preliminary hearing in the case of the State versus Victor James Ashford. Multiple charges including first-degree murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Mr. Ashford, how do you plead?" A door to the side opened and Victor was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. Lily had been right. He looked diminished. His silver hair had gone mostly white. His face was gaunt, his expensive suit replaced with prisoner's clothes. But when his eyes found mine across the courtroom, I saw the same cold calculation that had defined 12 years of my life. His attorney, Graham Westbrook, stood. "Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor." Judge Reeves nodded. "Very well, Miss Daniels, present your case." What followed was 3 hours of methodical evidence presentation. Lily walked the court through financial records, showing the systematic theft from my mother's trust fund. She presented Dr. Chen's analysis of the shell corporations and fraudulent investments. She played recordings of phone conversations between Victor and Dale Fontaine discussing the brake line tampering. Then she called Dale Fontaine to the stand. He looked uncomfortable in his suit, kept tugging at his collar. But his testimony was clear and damning. "Victor Ashford contacted me in February 2007. He said his wife's car needed some work done, nothing major, just wanted to make sure the brakes would fail at an opportune moment. He paid me $50,000 in cash." Graham Westbrook objected repeatedly, trying to discredit Fontaine as a career criminal with motivation to lie. But the recordings backed up every word. Victor's voice, cold and calculating, discussing timing and payment and making sure nothing could be traced back to him. After Catherine Moore died, Victor kept me on retainer. I helped him create documentation for a fake boarding school enrollment, made ID cards, report cards, even fabricated letters from teachers. Whatever he needed to maintain the illusion that his stepson was studying abroad. "Did you ever question why he needed these forgeries?" Lily asked. "I knew the boy wasn't at any school. Victor told me he was being kept at home for behavioral issues. I didn't ask details. That was the arrangement. I did the work, I got paid, I didn't ask questions." "When did you learn the truth?" Fontaine shifted uncomfortably. "Not until the police arrested me 3 months ago. When they told me that Matthew Moore had been locked in a basement for 12 years. I was shocked. I thought he was just being homeschooled or something, not imprisoned. It was a lie. He'd known or at least suspected. But his testimony still provided crucial evidence linking Victor to both my mother's murder and my imprisonment. Then it was my turn. Lily called me to the stand. I walked forward on legs that felt steadier than they had in months. The bailiff swore me in and I sat, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom on me. Lily started with basic questions. My name, my age, my relationship to Victor, and my mother. Then she got to the heart of it. Matthew, can you tell the court what happened after your mother's funeral? I took a breath and began. I described how Victor had taken me to the basement under the pretense of organizing storage. How he'd locked the door. How I'd screamed and cried and begged to be let out. How days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. I described the twice-daily food deliveries, always cold, always minimal. The books he'd occasionally throw down the stairs. The complete isolation from sunlight, from other people, from any sense of normalcy. Did Victor ever explain why he was keeping you there? Lily asked. He said I was a complication. That my mother's money was his. Now, and I was just an inconvenience he had to manage. He said if I ever got out, I'd ruin everything he'd built. How did you finally escape? I explained about the rusted lock, the years of working at it with a bent nail, the night I finally broke free. Parker in the gallery had tears streaming down his face, though he tried to hide it. Graham Westbrook's cross-examination was brutal. He suggested I was exaggerating, that perhaps I'd been kept in the basement for my own safety due to behavioral problems. He implied I was motivated by money, that this whole story was a scheme to access my mother's estate. Isn't it true that you stand to inherit millions if Victor is convicted? He asked, his voice dripping with insinuation. I don't care about the money, I replied evenly. I care about justice for my mother, and for the 12 years he stole from me. But you can't prove you were locked in that basement every single day for 12 years, can you? No witnesses, no photos from that time period. Just your word against Mr. Ashford's. There are the marks I carved in the wall. 4,380 lines, one for each day. There are my medical records showing severe malnutrition and vitamin deficiencies consistent with long-term isolation. There's the physical evidence of the reinforced lock on the basement door. I leaned forward. And there's the fact that Victor kept detailed financial records of using my mother's money to build his empire while I rotted below his feet. Why would he do that if I wasn't a threat he needed to contain? Graham had no good answer for that. He sat down, looking frustrated. Judge Reeves reviewed her notes for a long moment. Then she looked up. I've heard sufficient evidence to bind this over for trial. Mr. Ashford, you will remain in custody without bail. Given the severity of charges and flight risk, I'm not inclined to grant any leniency. Trial date is set for September 15th. The gavel came down with a sound, like thunder. Victor was led away, but not before he turned and looked at me one final time. His expression wasn't angry or defiant. It was almost curious, like he was studying a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. How had the broken boy from the basement become the man who just helped destroy him? I met his gaze without flinching. Then he was gone, and for the first time in 12 years, I felt something close to free. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every day, I sat in that courtroom and watched Victor's defense crumble under the weight of evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. First-degree murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Judge Reeves sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 60 years for the financial crimes. Victor showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He simply stood there, blank-faced, as if none of it mattered anymore. Maybe to him, it didn't. He'd lived the life he wanted for 12 years, spending my mother's money like a king. Now he'd spend the rest of his days in a cell, which seemed like poetic justice to me. The civil cases took another year to resolve. Dr. Chen worked with a team of lawyers to untangle Victor's web of shell corporations and fraudulent investments. In the end, they recovered $23 million from various accounts and properties. Not everything my mother had built, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to rebuild. Parker helped me find an apartment in a quiet neighborhood across town from Millbrook Heights. 3rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows that let in so much sunlight I sometimes had to close the blinds. I'd spent 12 years in darkness. Now I couldn't get enough light. Physical therapy continued for 18 months. My body slowly remembered what it meant to be strong. I gained weight, built muscle, learned to move without pain. The doctors said I'd made a remarkable recovery, though I'd likely deal with chronic issues for the rest of my life. Small price to pay for freedom. The psychological recovery was harder. I saw a therapist twice a week. worked through nightmares and panic attacks and the constant fear that someone would lock me away again. Dr. Morrison was patient, never pushing, always listening. She helped me understand that healing wasn't linear, that some days would be harder than others, and that was okay. One afternoon, about 2 years after Victor's conviction, I stood in the lobby of the Cascade Youth Foundation. It was a non-profit organization I'd started with some of the recovered money. Our mission was simple: provide support, resources, and legal assistance to young people escaping abusive home situations. The building itself was a renovated warehouse in downtown Portland. Bright colors on the walls, comfortable furniture, spaces designed to feel safe and welcoming. We had counselors on staff, lawyers who worked pro bono, and a network of emergency housing for kids who needed to get out immediately. Josie Warren, our director of operations, walked over with a clipboard. "We've got 15 new intake appointments scheduled this week. The word is spreading." "That's good," I said, though it broke my heart that we needed to exist at all. "There's someone here to see you. Says she knew your mother." I turned to find an older woman standing near the entrance, silver hair, kind eyes, holding a worn manila envelope. It took me a moment to place her, then the memory clicked. Nadira Chen, my mother's former business partner from her early startup days. "Matthew," she said softly. "I heard about what Victor did. I'm so sorry I didn't know sooner. I should have checked on you." Nobody knew. That's how he planned it. I gestured to a quiet corner where we could talk. "What brings you here?" She handed me the envelope. "Your mother gave this to me about a month before she died. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should make sure you got it." I thought she was being paranoid at the time. I held on to it all these years, and when I heard you'd survived, I knew I had to find you. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter in my mother's handwriting and a USB drive. "My dearest Matthew," the letter began. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me. I need you to know that every choice I made, every hour I worked, every risk I took with my company, it was all for you. You are my greatest achievement, my proudest accomplishment, my whole heart." The USB drive contains videos, letters, and documents I've been collecting. Evidence of Victor's behavior, his aggression, his obsession with my money. I'm documenting everything because I'm afraid. But I'm also fighting back. I've contacted lawyers about divorce proceedings. I'm making arrangements to protect you and the trust fund. By the time you read this, I'll either have succeeded or something will have gone terribly wrong. Please know that I loved you more than life itself. Be strong, be brave. Build something beautiful with the life I gave you. All my love, always, Mom. I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Parker, who'd arrived to meet me for lunch, stood beside me with his hand on my shoulder. "She was trying to save you," he said quietly. "Right up until the end." I looked around the foundation, at the bright walls and comfortable spaces, at the staff helping kids who reminded me of myself. Lost, scared, desperate for someone to believe them. "I think I finally did what she asked," I whispered. "I built something beautiful." And for the first time since escaping that basement, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Free, whole, and finally home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.